I'm Felicia Shakiba, and this is CPO Playbook, where we solve a business challenge in every episode. In today's episode, we're addressing a critical challenge in leadership. Understanding how self-awareness and personal responsibility differ between men and women, and how these differences impact leadership effectiveness and impact on the organization. Jan, it is such a pleasure to have you here today. Thank you for being here.
Well, thanks, Felicia. It's good to be here. Thanks.
First, I want to address the elephant in the room, which is, let's say I'm a CEO of a multinational corporation. Why should I spend time listening to an episode on self-reliant leadership while I'm thinking about the stock market?
That's a great question. I often get asked about the dichotomy of the whole description of a self-reliant leader. How can that be? How can you be self-reliant and be a leader of high-performing teams? And I often say it really is about striking a balance between being squared away yourself, physically, emotionally, mentally, spiritually, and creating that self-reliance in others, so that what ends up happening is there's a shared duty of accountability across the teams, the high-performing teams. And that's really what we all want. And we all know as leaders, what we're fighting against every single day is disengagement. People that don't want to be promoted, people that have side hustles, people that want to work to live. And meanwhile, we're trying to create a high-performing team of moving people from being compliant to committed to loyal. And so I think that might be a good reason to listen to this episode.
Interesting. So I think that there's a lot of things that go on in an organization around leadership. And so some of those things are going to obviously impact the organizational performance, and then ultimately the performance of you as a leader, as an individual.
Well, I think it'd be helpful to just describe, over the last 10 years, I've led 25, and I've led 2 or 3 or 4 all-male expeditions. We've really tried hard to, create a diverse group of people, and we always pair executives up with military veterans that are currently on active duty, transitioning out, or they're recently have transitioned out into the business world. And we've been in places as far south as Patagonia, as far north as Alaska. And, some pretty harsh conditions. And, what we always see are dynamics in decision-making, communication, dealing with adversity. And what I've noted is when you have a lot of people that are all equally physically able, especially if it tends toward being mostly men, it gets really competitive. Nobody wants to help, everybody wants to help each other, but nobody wants to be helped. They want to do it on their own.
So men are a little bit more wanting to be independent.
Yeah. And, a little, and it's always a little bit competitive, even though it's not. We know that we can only move as fast as the slowest person. So there's always that sort of dynamic. And when we have people that are all of kind of equal physical ability, I tend to see that the group doesn't come together as quickly and as strongly. It's almost like if there's a weak link in different areas, maybe physically, or somebody's dealing with something they talk about around the fire. But when the group has to pull together to help people at different points, it seems to create the high-performing team faster than not. So that's sort of the background and the context of, what I've observed over the last 10 years. And typically, almost invariably, in the first 10 minutes, and there's always a leader, the different leaders on different days. And on the first day, in the first 5 or 10 minutes, at some point, the leader turns around and goes, "Where is everybody?" They've gone way too fast. And we always use that as a teachable moment, in that, when you're at work in hybrid environments and people are remote and we're communicating via video, how do you know how people are doing? Out on an expedition, it's easy to turn around and go, I'm going too fast. And meanwhile, at work, we say we've got to do this by this deadline, and we just get going. And it's hard to check in with people and to know. And again, people hide that. They hide it if they're struggling, just like, they try to hide it out on an expedition, but you can't hide out there. And then, this year we actually led an all female except me, and there was one other gentleman from the UK that was on the trip, but we purposely set out to have an all female expedition because we just wanted to, have that opportunity for that to happen. And as I put it together, and including the guides who were women, world-class guides, by the way, I checked in with some mentors of mine that are women, and people that are running content at LinkedIn and different people. And I said, hey, what should be the objective of this? What should we try to figure out? And I talked to the participants as well, and they all said, we do not want this to, we don't want to talk about women issues on this trip. We just want to talk about leadership, and we want to talk about life, and it will be from a woman's perspective. So that was, that's sort of setting the stage, and I'm happy to go whichever direction you want next. But I just wanted to kind of create the backdrop, if you will.
I love that. And I love that the expedition wasn't about women's issues. It was about business issues from the lens of women. Were there differences? Were there similarities? And kind of unpacking them. How did this awareness manifest during the expedition? How can leaders best understand this dynamic in the workplace?
We know we all, as we get older, we get more experience, we have biases, we do. And we make a lot of assumptions, and sometimes those can serve us really well because we can make decisions quickly, and that can serve really well. Sometimes jumping to conclusion and making assumptions can lead us astray. And so we're always trying, in leadership, we're always trying to balance everything: confidence and humility, strategy and tactical. Everything is a balance. And the one common thread of all the leaders I've worked with that everybody's trying to work on from an emotional intelligence perspective is to create more self-awareness. If you were to ask a leader, a CEO, hey, what's the one thing you need to get better at every single day that's going to, move the organization in the right way, they would all say, I need to be able to communicate better. Well, as we know, communicate isn't just, one way. It's a lot of active listening. It's really reading the room, understanding. And, what happened out on the expedition, the biggest takeaway for me was, and by the way, the participants were half veterans, half executives. The veterans were from 3 different decades, graduates from West Point, United States Military Academy, so really accomplished women. And on the executive side, again, really accomplished. The average age of the participants on this trip was 49. And I think that was also a real difference maker. A lot of times with the veterans on the trip, they bring that number down a lot lower. But the takeaway for me was, especially from the women that were a little bit older versus the women that were a little bit younger, is how they struggled early days of, how did they want to show up as a leader? And they would talk about, what clothes did they want to wear? Where did they want to sit in the room? Who was going to be there? Did they want to speak up? Did they want to be quiet? What was going to be their posture? How are they going to come across? Because oftentimes, most of the women on the trip were mostly in male-dominated companies and industries. And I thought about how I show up to meetings over the past decades, how men show up. And I'll kind of gesture here on video is, you kind of walk in the room and you're like, okay, I'm here. What are we going to talk about? And no thought to, how am I going to show up? How do I want to be perceived? What am I wearing? How am I sitting? What's my body language? Any of that stuff. And again, So all these people I work with that are focusing so much on self-awareness, and they've got a long way to go, not just, hey, here's how I am, but here's how I'm perceived by others. Here's how I affect the room. That these women on the trip talked about, they've been doing that for decades. And it was just, I knew it in my head intellectually it was the case, but I didn't know it in my heart and what it felt like to be someone that had to be that hyper aware. And it was just, I just thought, what a privilege, to have that sort of insight as a male, as a man. And I just wished, I had had that experience, 20 years earlier. I would have been such a better executive, such a better CEO if I truly understood that. And not just about women showing up in the meetings, but, there's men that are quiet and lacking confidence. There's, different groups to really pay attention to and read the room, to be more effective and inclusive, and, to get, basically to get buy-in and inspire people.
We'll be right back. Back to the show. Why do you think that is? Like, if you were to just guess, why do you think women have so much more self-awareness coming into a meeting versus men?
What I see in male when it's all men, it's definitely a different dynamic. It kind of reminds me of a sales team, which isn't really a team. Led effectively, a sales team is a certain amount of cooperation and a certain amount of competition. Again, I don't want to generalize. I don't want to stereotype. I definitely don't want to be perceived as mansplaining. But I think, when you have a group of men, especially out in the field or in different environments, it can be really, really competitive. And I think men are just can be kind of oblivious to that. Whereas women come into the room and they're reading the room and trying to figure out where they fit in. And, I know, a great article that was written a while ago on the confidence gap did a great explanation of explaining how men and women differ in the way that they'll approach obstacles and opportunities. But I think, I think, I think it's been a little bit on the survival mode, so that they don't get talked over, so that they don't get misinterpreted, so that people, that people don't make the wrong assumptions about them. I think they've had to go into these meetings with a lot more intentionality than I think, and I'm speaking on behalf of men, that we go into those sorts of meetings.
Yeah. My guess is that, when I ask a question, I'm really allowing the other person to respond to the question. And it's more inquisitive than asking someone to do something and looking bossy or demanding.
Well, we did have an expedition in the same area years ago, probably 7 or 8 years ago, where we had one of the strongest leaders that ever showed up. And it was a woman who had very little experience outdoors. In fact, all her gear was brand new from REI. And she, had no idea what she was doing out in the wilderness. And there was a lot of male veterans from special operations on the trip. And she was the boss out there. She was the boss. And, and at one point, she was climbing and a gentleman was belaying her, keeping her safe. And I remember she put her finger in his chest and kind of said, Hal, don't effing drop me. You understand me? And he just kind of smiled. And I went up to him later. I said, hey, Hal, how did that make you feel that, that this woman said that to you? And he goes, I liked it. You- And, she was just the boss. She was literally, to this day, one of the best leaders we ever had out there. And, I always said what I observed in her was, and she hated the V word, the vulnerability word, but what I saw was 100% confidence. At the same time, because she was so confident, she could be vulnerable. And when she was vulnerable, it like gave her more confidence. And I'm like, this is like this superpower that she just uses confidence and vulnerability to keep building her leadership influence over other people. And I mean, I've rarely seen it to the degree I did with her. And it was just, really awesome. And I I've had a lot of younger women I've coached, and I've always thought, boy, it would be great for more women to see this kind of leader as a role model, where you know, she adapted in her own way, but she played by her rules. She didn't play by anybody else's, and she was effective. And she was a really high level executive in a Fortune 200 firm.
Yeah, that's incredible. I love that. I really do wish we could see that more often. That sounds amazing. It sounds like she really honed in on her strengths and leveraged them to make her superpowers.
Yeah, and she had a really varied background: law school, elementary school principal. I mean, she just had really, just a really broad levels of experience. So I think that made her effective and interesting too.
So, self awareness was really a key theme, it sounds like, in the lessons that you took away from this experience. So, how can organizations foster greater self awareness among their leaders, especially in male dominated environments?
It's a great question. I mean, it is such a great question, and I've never been asked that. And the meeting I just came out of today, and almost every meeting I come out of, is, what it all boils down to is discipline. If you're a sports fan, this over the past few weekends, there's been a lot of sports on, and, all the great teams have one thing in common, and that is the fundamentals, and they're disciplined. And it doesn't mean they don't have fun, but they're disciplined about the fundamentals. And, I see very few organizations that are really disciplined. And the best way you can tell is if they're reactive versus proactive. If people are back to back in meetings, I can just guarantee you it's reactive. We've got to help people do the calendar exercise and help them prioritize and help them create white space where they have time to prepare for meetings, time to follow up after meetings, time to think about, how do I want people to feel when I'm in this meeting or I come away from it? What's the objective and the tone? And so, the hard part of that is, you know, this is the long-term investment in people's self-awareness or development. On the other end is you've got short-term goals, quarterly, on time, under budget, safely to a certain quality standard. And again, it takes discipline to be able to balance both of those. And the easiest thing is just be reactive all day long. You don't have to think. And, so if the CEO is doing that, the president or the COO are just busy, 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 it's going to be really tough for the rest of the organization, to create that white space to really figure out how can they be more effective. So anyway, long answer to your question, Felicia.
No, I think that there's probably more than one way to do it, right? And I'm just wondering, do we need to design a training around how meetings work?
Yeah. Well, tactically, I think what doesn't get enough time spent on is how we're going to communicate, one-way and two-way communications, when and 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 what needs to be communicated. We don't spend enough time talking about meetings, having agendas and minutes, um, and then we don't talk about how we're going to have healthy debate,
I love that.
and we don't talk about how we're going to establish criteria and process for decision making. And all those four things, communication, meetings, debate, and decisions, come together. And if you don't talk about that in the context of those four things, along with roles and alignment, it's really tough. The meeting I just came from was, hey, you've got, some new roles and you've got this hybrid structure. You've got to really talk through this so that people know the lanes that they're in. And, part of that is, always a discussion about how they come across. And And part of it, I think, is not just, hey, go work on your self-awareness, but I think it's a leader's responsibility, to really help people coach it. And again, through questions, instead of saying, hey, you interrupted Felicia in this meeting 5 times, don't do that, is to say, hey, how did you think that meeting went? Did you catch yourself interrupting Felicia? How do you think that made her feel? And until somebody winces, like this Felicia, they go, uh, she probably felt disrespected. You're not going to change people's behavior. I mean, if I just said, don't interrupt, you'd go, okay, I'll be better at that. But if you said, how do you think that made her feel? Oh man, I bet she's not even, doesn't even want to speak up anymore. I bet I disrespected her in front of her peers. I made her feel small. Uh, I probably quashed an idea. I feel terrible. Until somebody gets there with their self-awareness, it's really, I think, hard to move them.
We'll be right back. Back to the show. Yeah, no, I agree. I think that there's so many people that could benefit from having more self-awareness, but there's only so much we can do as coaches and leaders and peers to encourage that self-awareness.
Well, I don't work with a single leader that's a great leader that's not working on this all the time. I mean, my oldest client is 72, and I would say I don't think that we've ever had a meeting where we weren't talking about, how he's coming across to other people and how, he would like to communicate more effectively. And again, that's an examination of your effect on other people. That's really what this self-awareness is. We often go to meetings and we come out and we go, well, Susie said this and Brian said that. And we don't often come out of a meeting and say, I wonder how I made Susie feel. I wonder how I made Brian feel. And there's so much, out on LinkedIn these days about, the power of recognizing people and, um, again, as leaders, making sure people feel seen and heard. I think one of the big misconceptions these days is that there's these big giant differences in the generations. I like somebody once said the only difference is how they use technology. But I think, no matter, what generation, I think honestly, I think we just want to be seen and heard. And if we're facilitating that, that's a heck of a step toward more self-awareness.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, you've really highlighted the importance of showing up with both self-awareness and responsibility, right, as a leader.
Well, I think it's being deliberate about it. I think, I think it might have been you that said it, Felicia, when you were on our show, was, you know, the biggest the biggest reason we should be inclusive and diverse is that we don't have groupthink. And, I think that's, the biggest thing. And again, that groupthink, why don't you want groupthink? Well, because you want healthy debate. Why do you want healthy debate? Because we want good decisions. Um, and why do you want good decisions? Well, that's going to move the business forward. And if we have good decisions, that we'll have commitment behind those decisions. And people will be engaged. So, again, I think if you really want to grow your business, you've got to think about that. And we had another guest on the show named Ron Carucci, and I thought he described it in really great terms, inclusivity. He said, you never want to have people ask 2 questions. And one of the questions is, do I matter? Does my job matter? That's the first question. The second question is, do I belong here? Are these my people? And I think, if you're working toward making people feel they matter and feeling they belong, I mean, you're doing the right thing. I mean, we are social animals. The worst thing, and the last stat I saw was 40% of people in the workforce feel like they're ignored by their boss. Well, that's that's emotional torture. We're social animals. We need to feel that, people care about us, that we matter, our job matters, we belong. And that's a leader's responsibility. And, they can all complain about young people quitting after 2 or 3 years, but chances are they're quitting because they don't feel they matter. They don't feel they belong. They don't feel there's a path forward. So I think we've got a lot of work to do to create that.
It's crazy that you say all of that. I mean, the knowledge that you bring, it feels like so deep and rich around the leadership and the work that you've done. It's really incredible.
It's kind of what I said toward the end of the answer to my last question. I think, business, the change is going to accelerate. We've known that for decades. It just keeps accelerating. And part of the job of a top leader is interpret the meaningful outside and constantly decide what business are you in and not in. Who's your customer? Who's not your customer? Those sound like simple questions, but they're really hard. So, we have to do that. And that means constant change and transformation for the organization. And everybody hates change. It's thrust on them. We know that. And so as a leader, I think we need to think in terms of being adaptable. We need the organization to be adaptable. We need people to be adaptable. And that means we need to be adaptable. It doesn't mean we need to be inauthentic. It doesn't mean we need to change. It doesn't mean we're broke and we need to be fixed. But if we're not open to adapting, and the only way to adapt is to continually learn and grow and, and look for the talent. And, again, there's a person I coach that I think is, the model for the 2024 and beyond leader. And, when I think about why do I think she's so good, she knows how to, she's aware of what's going on politically in the organization. So she has power and influence, but she's not quote unquote political. She gets along great with her peers. They respect her. People don't quit. She's able to find great talent, and inspire people. And she helps people get what they want. They help her get what she wants. I mean, she's the modern leader. And, and she's confident in who she is. And again, she works in a pretty male-dominated industry. And so anyway, long answer to your question, a little bit rambling. I apologize, Felicia, but I think that's, why we need to adapt, whether we're, men or women or whatever, we've got to really pay attention to what we're trying to do. And again, it's all working through other people to produce results. So that's what we've got to do. We can't do it all ourselves.
Jan, I agree. I think that's the ideal modern leader now in 2025 moving forward. Well, Jan, thank you so much for being here. I am so happy you've decided to be on our show, and thank you so much for allowing me to be on yours. It's definitely an honor. If today's episode captured your interest, please consider sharing it with a friend and leaving a review. To learn more about how CPO Playbook can support you or a leader you know with executive coaching or organizational transformation, visit us at cpoplaybook.com. Your support as a subscriber means the world to us, so thank you for tuning in. I'm Felicia Shakiba. Let's connect on LinkedIn. See you next Wednesday.